Thank you, Cassandra. We always appreciate our students doing our welcome, and especially our Student Advisory Board. Great job. Thank you. Well, this afternoon, we certainly want to welcome you to the 2012 Muncie Journalism and Campaign 2012 with Eleanor Clift. The official title, actually, is the Muncie Journalism and Politics Lectures are periodic programs, and it's endowed by Martha E. Betty Muncie, retired owner, publisher, and editor of the Dodge City Daily Globe. We're delighted that you are with us this afternoon. This is a busy week for us if you've been following our listserv and what we're doing this week, and we hope that you will find some time to continue to come out. I just want to go over some briefly with you. Tomorrow is a really big day in that we have Juan Manuel Santos, President of Colombia. And I want to say up front that the parking lot is going to be closed. So then we invite you to come here, and now we tell you the parking lot is closed, okay? But you can park across the street. Part of that is security, and I think you will understand. And one of the things, if you haven't been following in the paper, is President Santos really is a graduate of University of Kansas. And he's going to be visiting the university to receive the Alumni Distinguished Achievement Award. And on the back of it says, seating is first come, first served. Again, our study groups, and instead of two separate study groups, Republican and Democrat, we are having a joint with both of them. And it's the Republican strategist is Nancy Dwight, and Steve Hillenbrand is our Democratic one. Nancy has worked as I've said, Republican strategist, and Steve Hillenbrand has worked with President Obama's campaign. And they're going to follow it like blow by blow, you know, of what happens every week. And last week was unbelievable. They started last Wednesday, and there were over 70 people here last week. And for an afternoon study group from 4 to 5:30, I think that is extraordinary. And it gives you an idea of what's going on. Besides, they're going to show you a lot of things that, especially the campaign ads and all, that you won't see because we're not the battleground state, so as well as their expertise. We have book talk on October the 2nd, Presidents and Civil Liberties with Sam Walker. And the third is the first presidential debate. You know, there's 3 presidential debates and 1 presidential one, and we will have one here. But in addition to, we invite you to come and watch it on the screen. But we're going to also do in the debate, Professor Mary Banwart will lead a focus group on the undecided, unaffiliated, and you know, they kind of watch it and decide, did anything change in the middle? I think you've seen that, so we will do that. So that would be an opportunity. And if you think you fit in that category, come. If you don't fit in that category, come anyway. And part of it, and I think that would really tell you what you really want to do. Today's event is really co-sponsored by the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications, and we certainly want to thank Dean Ann Brill for helping with the sponsorship. Now it really is my pleasure to talk a little bit about Eleanor Clift, and I understand she doesn't want it lengthy and long, so I'm going to keep it short and talk fast. So, and part of it I would just simply say, welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you.
Eleanor Clift is a contributor to Newsweek magazine and the Daily Beast website. She writes about politics and policy in Washington, and she is currently assigned to the White House. She is a regular panelist on syndicated talk shows. The McLaughlin Group. She has appeared as herself in several movies, including Dave, Independence Day, Murder at 1600, Rising Sun, and the CBS series Murphy Brown. Formerly Newsweek White House correspondent, Cliff has also served as a congressional and political correspondent for 6 years. She was a key member of the magazine's 1992 election team. As a reporter in Newsweek Atlanta Bureau, Cliff covered Jimmy Carter's bid for the presidency. She has also followed the campaign, worked on with Bill Clinton from the start to Inauguration Day. And she left Newsweek briefly to serve in the White House correspondent for Los Angeles Times. When we look at what we talk about, she has covered all of the presidential campaigns, and there's not a lot of people can say that since 1976. So I think you're looking at someone who knows a lot about what is going on and all the players. She lives in Washington, D.C., where she's on the advisory council of the International Women's Media Foundation, the board of the Center of Politics and Journalism, and the board of governors of the National Hospice Foundation. I think I did justice, even though she wanted us to be brief, and we are just delighted, and we want you to sit back and enjoy as our director, Bill Lacey, will conduct the interview. Thank you very much. Bill, give a round of applause.
Eleanor, welcome back to the Dole Institute.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great that we could get you back this year. Let's start with a little biographical information. Tell everybody about the early portions of your life and how you ultimately decided to pursue journalism as a career.
Well, I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I grew up in Queens. My parents were immigrants from a little tiny island in the North Sea off the coast of Germany and Denmark, and my father had a delicatessen, first in Brooklyn and then in Sunnyside, Queens. It was Roloff's Delicatessen, R-O-E-L-O-F-F as in Frank, S as in Sam, and that's now on my passport, and every time I fly, I own up to my maiden name. So I'm never too far from those roots. I went to public schools in New York, and I went to Hofstra College for 1 year, and dropped out, went to Hunter College at night for several years, got pregnant, got married, got pregnant, and in that order. And then I never dreamed that I could be a journalist because I was a product of my generation, and women were secretaries or nurses, or you got married right out of high school and were a homemaker. If you were really daring, maybe you joined the women's services of the military. And so I went to work as a secretary, and my aspiration was to be where what I typed was interesting. And I was lucky enough to walk into Newsweek, located then on Madison Avenue between 49th and 50th Streets, and the national affairs editor was looking for someone who would stay as a secretary. He didn't want someone who wanted to be a reporter or a writer, and he had interviewed a string of women who were all graduates of the finest colleges, the Seven Sisters colleges. And when Eleanor Roloff's came in, he could see pretty clearly that I had no idea what being a reporter or writer might be. And so he hired me, and after a year I became a researcher. And then my first husband was in the advertising business. He was transferred to Atlanta. I was in the Atlanta Bureau of Newsweek. We covered 7 states. It was the tail end of the civil rights movement. And it was really an exciting period. And the 3 men in the office were traveling all the time. And so these assignments would come in. And I didn't know any better, so I just did them. And basically, looking back, it was like an apprenticeship. But the women's movement was beginning to emerge. And the women in New York brought a lawsuit against the magazine for gender discrimination in March of 1970. They initially called me and told me to stop reporting, that I was being exploited. And I said, but if I stop being exploited, then I'm just the secretary. And so I continued to be exploited. And the women pressed their lawsuit. Eleanor Holmes Norton was the lawyer. She represents Congress today, the District of Columbia. And they won a number of things, including internships for women at the magazine. So I applied to do an internship. They assigned me pretty early on, after I completed the internship, to cover Jimmy Carter's campaign. The great minds in New York and Washington thought this peanut farmer, one-term governor of Georgia, would never win, so assigned the junior reporter. So I covered the Carter campaign. He won. They moved me to Washington. I've been there ever since. I call it my Cinderella story.
That's a great story. The McLaughlin Group has been on now 30 years, which is really hard to believe. And early on, President Reagan called it the political version of Animal House.
Right.
What's it been like being on the McLaughlin Group?
Well, I remember the first time I was invited to be on the show, and I felt like I had been dropped into a parallel universe. There was Pat Buchanan, Bob Novak, who was known in Washington as the Prince of Darkness, Jack Germond, who was sitting there working on the racing forum before we went on the air, and me. And they were all quite polite initially, but then we got on the set and the red light would go on and Bob Novak would be, you know, lunging out of his chair and waving his finger in my face and saying, "Eleanor Clift and people of her ilk." And so my initial concern when John invited me on the show was I told him I was a reporter and I didn't have strong opinions. And he said, "If you want to be on my show, you better get some strong opinions." Well, sitting opposite Buchanan and Novak, I found it was very easy to have strong opinions. It was no problem at all. And, you know, over the years, it's all pretty much in good fun. And I've learned, I think, as a woman, sometimes we take these political spats more personally, but I've watched the guys go at it hammer and tong, and then 10 minutes later they're talking about the Redskins. And so I've learned how to develop a thicker skin, and I figure, you know, they knock me down, but then I'm like one of those inflatable dolls. I pop back up, and occasionally I land a blow too. So it's good, and Buchanan in particular, he's now the longest serving panelist. He did take 3 sabbaticals to run for president, twice as a Republican, once as a Reform candidate. He knows a lot, he's lived through a lot of political history, and he's actually a gentlemanly debater, and he will often say, you know, "Eleanor is exactly right," and, you know, I get all puffed up there for a minute, and then he will proceed to eviscerate me. That's kind of how it works. But the show, it's an iconic show, and as you said earlier in the reception, it really was the first of the kind of political combat shows. I mean, now there are so many imitators, and in many ways we're gentle compared to some of the other shows, and we don't descend into the tabloid. I mean, we don't do, you know, Michael Jackson or the missing woman in Aruba, that sort of thing. But John can spend a whole half hour on, you know, should NATO be enlarged, and he can make it entertaining. So he really does have an interest in public policy.
Mm-hmm. They're moving to the presidential election. There seems to be a pretty widespread feeling in a lot of the mainstream media that the president is a shoo-in at this point. What's your assessment of the campaign as of today?
Well, I think Democrats really have to guard against overconfidence because we live in such a fast-paced world where outside events can come and overwhelm, and the media moves so rapidly. But if you look at the overall matchup, the national matchups, it's still pretty close. The president is a couple of points ahead. But if you look at the battleground states and you look at the path to that magic 270, the 270 electoral votes, most analysts give President Obama 237, so he would be short 33. Am I doing the right math? He's short, 33 votes. The analysts look at the states that are leaning toward or solidly Republican, and they range from 191 to 210, which leaves Mitt Romney with 60 or 70 to go. So if Obama can take Ohio, Florida, Virginia, almost any one of those, and then a couple more states, he's checkmated Romney. And some of the states, I think that the Republicans thought they could move back into the Republican camp, like Colorado, now seem to be trending towards Obama. So I think that as of now, Romney has a very steep climb to get to the 270 that he needs. It's not impossible, but it's close to impossible.
how would you assess, I mean, the president's '08 campaign was historic in many ways, but it's really, I would argue, one of the best run presidential campaigns in history. How would you assess his campaign this year, given the fact that there's so much bad news against him?
Well, '08 was a crusade. That's how the pollster Peter Hart puts it. '08 was a crusade for Democrats. This is almost just another election fight. But if you look at how they've run the campaign, they front-loaded the spending. They looked at what happened to John Kerry in '04, where Karl Rove and the Swift Boat Veterans for Truth undermined Kerry's military credentials over the summer. Kerry didn't respond. He thought nobody would believe this, and a number of analysts look back and think John Kerry lost the election over the summer. Well, the Obama campaign was very aware of that, and they weren't going to let it happen to them, but they were going to do it to Mitt Romney, and they spent the bulk of, not the bulk, they still got a lot left, but they front-loaded their advertising spending over the summer, and they really dismantled Romney's reputation as a businessman. They went after Bain, they hammered about the tax returns, and they did him enormous damage. And while the Romney campaign responded in part, they didn't respond as vigorously as they should. And then the conventions happened, and the Republicans used the convention to boost Romney's likability, which they did marginally, but they did nothing to really, or very little, to lay out what he would do as president over the next 4 years. And so they came out of that convention, you know, with the most memorable part of it being Clint Eastwood talking to the empty chair. And the Democrats had a very successful convention. Bill Clinton has now achieved statesman status. He framed the arguments against the Republicans very well, and the Democrats got a substantial bump, which could have been fleeting, but then seemed to be bolstered by some of the Romney missteps, the speaking too politically and prematurely on Libya, and then the 47% tape. And so that's when I think the numbers began to shift after the conventions and picked up some velocity here in the last week.
Does it surprise you that the Romney campaign hasn't seemingly run a more effective campaign?
Listen, the joke in Washington is they should call in Bain to turn around the campaign. Honestly, it's stunning that a guy who's supposed to be so data-driven and had all this under control, plus the fact they gave out bonuses last month. For what? I don't know. Maybe that's just what they do in the corporate world. But the campaign has not distinguished itself. But you know, in the end, it's the candidate. And then everybody looks for everything else to blame. And I'm sure, you know, if Obama had lost in '08, we'd look back at everything he did and said it was wrong. So I'm reluctant to say it's any poor campaign analyst's fault. In the end, I think that Mitt Romney was running as something I don't think he is. And whatever he is, American people have a broad acceptance of what they like in a candidate, but I think they want to believe it's real. And at this stage of the campaign, I think Romney is still trying to convey who he is. And there is a sort of sense of desperation emerging from the campaign. And when the candidates feel all is lost, then sometimes they reach within themselves and they deliver a speech and everybody says, oh, why weren't they like this for the whole campaign? I remember saying that about Mike Dukakis, about John Kerry. I think you could say it about people on the Republican side as well.
A number of them were my clients.
Yeah, right. Right. And maybe it's because they're overhandled, you know, the people around them. I don't mean it personally, but, you know, candidates think there's some magic to this, and, you know, the strategists all get their heads together. And that's what comes across about Romney, that he's been told to do too many things by too many different people, and his head is spinning, and it just isn't coming out right.
What does he need to do to get back in this race, to make it, it's competitive nationally, like you said. There seems to be a trend where the president's opened a little bit of space in some of the battleground states. He's got the debates coming up, but what else could Governor Romney do to get back into this?
Yeah, his people are kind of hanging everything on the debates. I mean, their model for the campaign is 1980, when all the objective measurements for Jimmy Carter were poor, but he was doing well in the national polls against Reagan because people thought Ronald Reagan was this, cowboy from the West. He couldn't be trusted. One debate a week before the election, and Carter's aides did not want him to debate, but Carter had won in '76, and Jerry Ford had debated him, and Carter felt like, I can't not debate. And I remember sitting in the hall for that debate, and I think it was over before it began. Carter came to the podium first, and he had some notes, and he had dropped a pen. He was leaning over to pick up the pen, and across the stage strides this Hollywood god. And so Carter comes up from picking up the pen, looks up, there's Reagan, smiling, hand extended. The body language was, and of course that debate gave us the famous line, "Are you better off today than 4 years ago?" So I think the debates are important for Romney, but it's hard to think that that's going to turn it around. The other thing you hear people say is that he needs to really come clean about what he wants to do as president, and he, as he advocates tax cuts, lower regulation, and magically the economy is going to get better. Closing of loopholes, and everybody is now suspicious. What are these loopholes? Who's going to get hurt? If he's serious about this, I think it's the only chance he has left, is to really be specific and show he has a plan and how it would work. He's tried to just be the man on the wedding cake who stands there and looks good while President Obama implodes. And that the economy is not bad enough, people like Obama enough, that strategy hasn't worked. So really get specific, and then say, the heck with it, I'm really gonna be who I am, and see what happens.
I think a lot of conservatives are surprised at the lack of content in the campaign, especially given the choice of Paul Ryan to be his vice president. I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, when he made that selection, everyone on the right claimed that was a very bold choice, and clearly was signaled the intention of the way he would seek the presidency, but it hasn't turned out that way. Everyone
on the right thought it was a bold choice, and everyone on the left said, whoopee, because as much as we all know Medicare and everything needs to be reformed, all of that is still the third rail. It's it hasn't shown any ability to win elections. And so they make this bold choice, and then they back away from everything. And Romney says, oh, well, when I'm president, it's the Romney plan, it's not the Ryan plan. But the Ryan plan, presumably, is why he was picked, and it's what everybody associates with him. So again, I think it's another symptom of a campaign that doesn't know what it wants to be, and is trying to be all things to all people, and you can't do that.
Well, the McLaughlin Group always asks its panelists to make predictions. Do you want to make a prediction on the presidential race?
Yeah, I mean, I think Obama's going to win, and I'm tempted to say, over 300 electoral votes.
What do you think will happen in the Senate?
Senate is fascinating because certainly 6 weeks ago, even a month ago, the assumption was that the Republicans were likely to gain control of the Senate. There are 23 democratically held seats up, only 10 Republican. The Republicans only need 4 seats to gain control. They would have gained control in 2010 if it weren't for a couple of Tea Party candidates who were really over the top. But then you go race by race, and Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, Scott Brown. Scott Brown was holding an edge over Elizabeth Warren. Democrats were thinking she wasn't going to be able to take that Kennedy seat back. Since Romney's difficulties, now Brown seems to be losing. Virginia, where Tim Kaine was in a dead heat with George Allen, Romney's problems coming to the fore has suddenly opened up a lead for Tim Kaine. And then Missouri, Todd Akin, I don't think I have to go into details there, but that turned a race that was almost certainly Republican into at least a 50-50 shot for Democrats. Even in Wisconsin, Tammy Baldwin, an openly gay female, running against the former progressive governor, Tommy Thompson, she's now opened up a lead. Now, these may be ephemeral, but a lot of these were seats that people didn't think there was any contest. And so I think now you have the main analysts in Washington, Charlie Cook and Stu Rothenberg, each saying that 50-50, but a thumb or two on the side of the Democrats holding on by a seat or two.
Mm-hmm. And Republicans will hold the House.
That's the conventional wisdom, is that the Democrats will win some seats, narrow that margin, but are unlikely, unless a wave suddenly develops, which it usually doesn't happen this late in the game. Yeah. So then you think you have a President Obama, you have a Democratic narrowly held Senate, and you have a Republican House. Kind of like what we have today.
Well, and that
and
actually,
what's different?
Yeah, that actually sets up my next question. Now, the president has been very vocal about saying that he believes the Republicans in the House will try to work with him. Mm-hmm. And Bob Woodward's recent book made clear that John Boehner was trying to work out an arrangement with the president, and it didn't work out. But do you see any hope that things will be better in the second term?
Well, the president says, quote, the fever will break. That if he's removed as somebody they are going to work to defeat, that they will work with him. That may be overly optimistic, but I think I'm actually working on a story along these lines, and that is how this president is going to have to reorient himself and his White House to work differently with Capitol Hill than they did the first 4 years. And if the Republicans do not win the presidency and do not capture the Senate in a race where they should have, with an economy this bad and with that many opportunities, there's going to be some infighting. Now, some people are going to say Romney wasn't conservative enough, but others may say we went too far with the Tea Party. But whatever that opening is within the Republican Party is what the president has to exploit. Call it divide and conquer. He's got to woo some Republicans up there while keeping his Democrats together. And he's got to get people in his White House who know how to do that, whether it's the schmoozing part or the legislating part, and he's got to do more of that himself. And I think there's a recognition that if he wants to get anything done, and the problems are significant. He can't, some second-term presidents coast along without dealing with Congress anymore. They just pay attention to the rest of the world. But the economic difficulties here that we're going to face right after the election, you can't coast by them. It's going to take some serious work. And I think this president is capable of making deals on entitlement reforms that a lot of Democrats are not going to like. He showed that. You can see that in the Woodward book. So I think he'll be ready to deal, and maybe they will if this loss is searing as it looks like it might be.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that Gallup reported this past week that 60% of Americans have very little faith in the media anymore. Why would you think that is?
Well, I think the media is, I think people are now looking to find a segment of the media that agrees with them. And then they find that little home, and then they think everybody else is not doing a good job. And I think some of the more thoughtful journalism that was done by news magazines and newspapers, it's still there, but you have to get past all the blogs and the sound bites to get to it. And so I think people are view an election and just he said this and he said this and the back and forth, and I think it's disillusioning for everyone, and they blame the messenger. So the media is going through a huge transformation, obviously, and it's a very reflexive medium now, and often there's rumors take hold, and we're not always entirely reliable, as it turns out, when the facts catch up with us. But I think it's because it's so fast-paced. You know, back in the day, you'd weigh information. There'd be time between news cycles. Not only reporters could think things through, politicians could too. Now everything is instant reaction, and everybody's kind of looking to find the weak point of the politicians. And I think, you know, I admire people who go into politics. It's a courageous thing to do. You can succeed, but you can also fail very publicly on a big stage. And I sympathized with Ann Romney the other day when she was asked about all the criticism that supposedly their Republican friends were offering publicly, and she cut off the question and she said, "Enough, this is hard. You know, people should get in the arena and try." So, you know, we're in a 24/7 media environment, and in a race as intense as this, and in a political climate as partisan as this, it's not pretty, and I think everybody kind of loses in the overall regard among the American people.
You've been covering and observing presidents closely, like you said, since President Carter. Kind of give your assessment of some of the presidents that we've had, starting with President Carter, the ones that you really think, that you really admired, and for what reasons?
I admired Jimmy Carter, and I still do, and I think his presidency will look better over history. The only lasting peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, the Panama Canal Treaty, which I think a number of senators lost their seats over that, and he got them to make that very tough vote. He also tried to get us to face up to the energy situation in this country, put on his cardigan sweater, and he locked the thermostats in the White House, and when the Reagan people came in, they unlocked the thermostats, removed the solar panels from the West Wing, seriously, and said, and I think President Reagan said, there's you know, more oil under second base at Yankee Stadium, we don't have to worry. So we lost about 30 years in confronting our oil addiction. President Reagan, I admired the force of his personality. I think in some ways he brought the economy back just by believing in it. And I would sit in those press conferences, and I would sometimes watch him kind of struggle to remember what he was supposed to say and he was not allowed to say. And even though I disagreed with many of his policies, I always felt a tug of affection for him as a human being. And I've actually kept in touch with his wife, Nancy Reagan, over the years, and greatly admire her. And she was quite maligned as a first lady, but she was a force for good, if you define good as I do, by being pragmatic and being in the middle and not getting pulled too far in either direction. I didn't know either of the Bushes all that well. Bill Clinton, I did cover his campaign from the start, and I think about the two of them today, Bill and Hillary Clinton. I can't think of another woman who has been in the sustained spotlight as long as Hillary Clinton. When you think, you know, 8 years as First Lady, then Senator, and now Secretary of State, and she's, I think, a potential candidate in 2016. And Clinton has achieved a sort of a statesman-like status among Republicans and Democrats. And I have to laugh. A lot of Republicans look back at the Clinton years, oh, how wonderful it was, we all worked together. They kind of forget that little impeachment thing that happened. But there's no one better than Clinton at framing an argument. He can take an anecdote and then a bunch of information and boil it all down. And as he might put it, he can put it down there where the goats can get it. I mean, he really talks to ordinary people. And if you talk to anybody who's teaching college today, and I know you do, they'll all tell you people remember the Clinton years as the internet boom and all that. And they have no idea what all that personal stuff was about. And I talked to this one college professor, he says, and I really don't want to go there. So anyway, so Clinton is a force of nature. And I think it's astounding that the Clintons and President Obama could come together and overcome whatever the bad feelings there were from the primary race, and come together for the good of their political party and for the good of the country. And when President Obama and Hillary Clinton received the bodies home from Libya the other day, I don't know how many of you saw the television footage, Hillary spoke, and then the president spoke, and when the president stopped back away from the podium and Hillary back, she reached behind the podium and took his hand. It brought tears to my eyes. I thought that was a very fine moment.
Mm-hmm. If you were, everybody out here is going to be watching the presidential election here for the next 30+ days. Mm-hmm. If you were telling them 2 or 3 authors or pundits or commentators that they ought to really pay attention to, other than Eleanor Clift, who would you tell them to read and really kind of try to make it a point every day or couple days to kind of touch base with in terms of their writing or their commentary?
I like Shields and Brooks on PBS, and I think they're both good-natured, and Mark Shields, David Brooks. Mark Shields is more of a traditional liberal. David Brooks is a conservative, but really sees a broader picture, and I think David Brooks' column is always worth a read, and his comments about Mitt Romney after the 47% tape were really quite devastating. That's when I thought, boy, this is really taken blood. And then in terms of columnists, I like Eugene Robinson with the Washington Post. You know, I kind of skip around. It's not like I'm wedded to any of them, and I obviously watch MSNBC and not Fox, but sometimes I even feel like running from the room because, you know, it's like too much, you know. And I think Chuck Todd, I like him. He's a good, you know, he loves politics, and it doesn't matter what political hat he wears because he's just looking at the numbers and the trends, and I think he's good. And then I think the 2 prognosticators I mentioned earlier, Charlie Cook and Stu Rothenberg, they're both, you know, nonpartisan, but Charlie comes from more the Democratic side and Stu more from the Republican side, and I think their rundowns are pretty dispassionate and valuable. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Anyway. I have one last question, but then we'll open it up to your questions. And as a reminder, if you have a question, don't yell or scream at Eleanor and me. Just raise your hand, and one of the students with the mics will try to find you and come around to you. But my last question goes back to the McLaughlin Group. 30 years ago it started up. When you first appeared on that show, could you ever imagine that show would still be on in 2012?
No, and you know, John was ruminating the other day about how retirement holds no interest for him. And he said, you know, you got to keep the mind engaged. He said, some people, you know, can get that from golf. I never could get that from golf. And then Pat looks up and says, well, how about miniature golf? Have you tried that? So, anyway, as long as John can keep doing it, you know, we'll keep showing up. So.
How old is he now?
I don't know if I should give that away.
Oh, okay. Well, we shouldn't have put you on the spot. Yeah, I kind of figured he had to be. Well, why do you think it's been so successful and lasted so long?
Because he brings together quick commentary from people who, we're not all reporters anymore, but at the beginning we were all reporters who actually covered this stuff. And he puts it together with people he turns into personalities, I guess. And he keeps it moving, and he surprises. He doesn't always come out where you think he's going to come out. And I think he's mellowed over the years. And, and he admires the political arts. And because of that, even though he's nominally Republican, he's a real secret admirer of Bill Clinton and Barack Obama because he thinks they do what they do well. And he gets frustrated that there isn't anybody since Ronald Reagan on his side that can perform to that level.
He's not the only one. Questions from the audience?
Iran?
Sorry, ask again.
What do you see that's coming up for Iran?
Oh, when I flew here this morning, there was an interesting piece in the Washington Post Outlook section. It had, the headline was, "What if Israel bombs Iran?" And they had the perspective from Washington, Tehran, and Tel Aviv. And the perspective from Washington was, can we get him to pull the planes back? Can we shoot down the planes? And this is all kind of fictional. And then Vice President Biden saying, no, we can't shoot down the planes. Get Netanyahu on the phone. And Netanyahu says, you know, I couldn't wait any longer, Mr. President. Point being, they do not give the White House advance warning. And then the White House goes into this huddle. They can't disavow it. So they say they respect Israel's right to defend itself. They don't exactly say they support it. And then they leak a couple of days later that they didn't get advance warning. But they monitor very carefully, are the attacks successful? All right, in Tehran, there are scenes with 1,000 people killed at one site. There's hospital, the stretchers going to hospitals. There's satisfaction among people watching it that their main nuclear facility, which is buried under a mountain, is not touched. The people rally, and the response is, more than ever, we're going to reconstitute this program. We're not going to let them end this program. And they retaliate with missiles and rockets into Israel. In Tel Aviv, the reaction is, we'll do anything. This is an existential threat. Even though the Secretary of Defense, I believe, was opposed to the attack. Once it's underway, everybody is for it. And they're mixed. They don't know how successful it is. It could only set back their nuclear production for maybe even a period of months because the main facility was saved. And they're now going to be bracing for attacks from Hezbollah. So that, you know, these are three reporters/writers writing what they expect is going to be carried out. I mean, I would strongly hope, and the president certainly is conveying his wish to Netanyahu, that no attack take place. And the sanctions are really hurting in Tehran, and you have to give those a chance to work. And I think the president just wants to get past the election, and he very publicly stood up to Netanyahu a couple of weeks ago. And frankly, I've never seen a foreign leader so openly, you know, advocate a course of action in the middle of a presidential campaign. So that's not telling you what's going to happen, but it's giving you some scenarios of what people are likely to expect.
Okay, we have a question here.
My friend and I both have this question for you. Last year, the United States lost its AAA rating, and it was due to congressional intransigence. This year, we have a fiscal cliff that we are set to go off, no matter who becomes president, before the next inauguration. And I'm wondering what you think is going to happen to that fiscal cliff, and whether you think that there will be, that we will pull back from the precipice of that fiscal cliff.
I think the repercussions of not doing anything are so great that Congress will act. I think if Romney is elected, likely they will, to use the Washington phrase, kick the can until he's in office. If it's Obama, I think he moves very quickly to try to put something together. And he holds some high cards here. The Bush tax cuts do expire. He doesn't have to sign anything. They just go away, and they solve a lot of the problem. And so he has that as a bargaining tool. The so-called sequestration, which is the across-the-board cuts, was designed to be so painful that it would force action, and you have the Republicans in particular really anxious about the fact that the defense budget would be cut to the extent that it is. So maybe I'm still a foolish optimist, but I think there's a deal to be made, and I think a president re-elected who won't run again is the one to make it.
Okay, I have a question here.
President, in this presidential election season, both presidential campaigns are utilizing social media outlets to connect with their supporters. What sort of impact do you think this will have on young voters?
Well, both campaigns are communicating differently, and President Obama really needs to get young voters out. I mean, they support him by a margin of 2-1, but they are notoriously fickle when it comes to turning out. And their numbers were good in '08, but as the president often says on the campaign trail, I'm not as sexy as I was 4 years ago. We got to grind this out, and and I think the way you reach people with social media. I know at the Democratic convention when the big acceptance speech was canceled in that big stadium. The reason that the Democrats were upset about that is because they were going to capture everybody's data in that stadium. I mean, that's the magic of these campaign rallies. You get people to just put in their information, and then you have them forever on your fundraising list. And I think the Obama campaign has been very successful in cultivating small donors. I mean, and that used to be the strength of the Republicans, actually. But Obama has won that. So, this is how a lot of people communicate today, and especially young people. So, and the campaigns have learned how to do it. Doesn't make the White House press corps all that happy. They feel they feel like they're just props a lot of the time.
Okay, we got a question over here.
Yes, what effect do you think the voter ID laws will have on the election, and in which areas?
The voter ID laws, I mean, if the polls bear out and Obama really does win pretty handily, then who cares? At least that will be the reaction for the moment. But if we do go into a very close election and we get into chads and hanging chads and all that, the voters, well, I call them voter suppression laws, not voter ID laws, because they really are, I think, they're looking for a problem that doesn't exist. There may be voter lists that are, if you want to use the word fraudulent, but those people don't vote. And you look at the kind of government ID that is required, that older people, younger people, minorities don't have. It costs money to get them. They don't know where their birth certificate is. You have to go to a place to get them. And I think, to its credit, the Obama campaign has not spent a lot of time sort of whining about it. Instead, they've been out there organizing like crazy, telling people what kind of documents they need, where they need to go to get them, organizing transportation. Pennsylvania, of course, the member of the legislature there, when that ID law went through, said, "Oh, this will carry the state for Romney." Kind of gave away the motivation. But that's still in the courts in Pennsylvania, so it's still being challenged, and I hope it doesn't amount to much, because we should be making voting easier in this country, not setting up more hurdles.
Okay, we have a question over on this side.
Do you think we might see a split between the Electoral College and the popular vote?
I think that's highly. Oh, you mean that somebody would win nationally and yet have the Electoral College? Is that what you mean? Yes. Yeah. Well, I guess if it's theoretically possible, if in all those red states, like if everyone in Wyoming gets out and votes 3 or 4 times, and really drives up the Republican vote, I guess that might happen, because I do see Obama as having the edge in the Electoral College. I think it's unlikely.
A question over here? No questions? We have a lady who's had her hand up right here. Can we just... Eric, I mean, can you come over here? Let's do her right now because she's had her hand up from the beginning.
Back to election coverage by the media. The National Review had a cover showing a picture of the Democratic Convention, and instead of all the signs that actually said forward that everyone carried, they photoshopped it to say abortion. Now, people who had not seen the campaign or the actual convention believe that. Now, does the rest of the media have a role to call out the people who allow actual lies to go out into the public?
Well, I think, satire and irony is always difficult to pull off in the media. I remember when the New Yorker during the '08 campaign did a cover of Michelle Obama looking like a real radical, and they got a lot of blowback from, Democrats saying, hey, New Yorker, we thought you were on our side. This doesn't, and they thought people would get that they were making fun of the way Michelle Obama was being portrayed as a radical when she wasn't. I think, to me, most readers of the National Review understand that it's a publication from the right and that they were trying to make a point with that. And the point they were trying to make is that virtually every speaker at the Democratic National Convention talked about abortion rights, to the point where some female commentators who were normally sympathetic to the Democrats, and notably Cokie Roberts, said on this week, on that following Sunday, that she thought all the talk about abortion was, quote, over the top, and that 30% of Democrats were pro-life. So that prompted me to actually do a story. And if you go to Daily Beast and Google me and abortion, you probably find it. And so I called the people who put the convention together, and Jeff Garin, a pollster, said to me, first of all, the only people who watch a convention from beginning to end are committed political junkies or people who are paid to watch it. So if you want to get a point across, yes, you have to repeat it. And he said, I don't know what she means by over the top. He said, I didn't think the language was strident, but it was repeated over and over. And he said, that's because the Republicans have gone so far to the right on reproductive rights issues, with, again, Todd Akin being centerpiece, but also the debate in Virginia about mandating transvaginal probes, which made it onto Saturday Night Live as a joke, and Amy Poehler said transvaginal sounds like an airline. And so the point, though, is that suddenly there was lots of room in the middle for Democrats to talk about this issue, more room than there had been in the past. And this was after 20 years of the Bill Clinton era rhetoric that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And now the Democrats felt comfortable just saying safe and legal. And so there was political method to this. And so that's what the National Review was getting at.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
Emmanuel Cleaver has stated that the civility in Washington is damaging everything in Congress and so on. What do you think? You've been there for so long. Is it worse, or is it just getting ridiculous, or what is the condition now?
He said the incivility. I think actually they're still pretty civil on the floor of Congress. My good friend from here and my good friend from there. But the refusal to compromise, where compromise is seen now as a dirty word, and the Tea Party really took it to extremes a year ago in the summer over the debt ceiling fight. And we're here at the Dole Institute, and Senator Dole was a master deal maker. I mean, that's what legislators do. And suddenly it's considered sort of un-American if you give at all. And so I think we are in a different place when it comes to how this is being treated on Capitol Hill. And I guess I want to say it's going to take leadership. It's going to take leadership from both parties to find places where they can come together to face up to some really serious national challenges, beginning November 7th, right after the election. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions if anybody has one. Got one right here. Yes.
You spoke of the debate with Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, and we've got a debate on October 3rd between Romney and Obama. What kind of impact do you think it will have on the voting public and on both sides, and what do you think their approaches will be?
October 3rd is the first of 3 debates, and it will be about domestic issues. And I assume the viewership will be very high. And so the stakes are enormous, I think, for both candidates. And it's 90 minutes. The moderator will be Jim Lira, who's done a number of these debates. In fact, he's got a book out about all the debates he's moderated. And they have the 90 minutes divided into what they call issue pods. And it will be all about domestic issues and the economy. And so I think it's very important. It's Romney's best chance to transform his image from a likely loser into somebody who's more competitive. And it's Obama's chance to seal the deal if he can do it. And it's a chance for viewers to really hear more of an extended discussion from these 2 men about what they would do if they're in the Oval Office for the next 4 years, about the economic challenges facing this country and the fact that, and the pain that a lot of people are in because of the weak economy.
Okay, we have time for one more question right here.
The name Joe Biden has not been mentioned yet. What is your assessment on him as vice president, has served with Obama, and what's his impact on the campaign and future of the Democratic Party and Obama?
Okay, I actually did mention him in connection with the Iran question, because in this scenario in the Post, they have Vice President Biden very much there saying, we can't shoot down the Israeli planes, get Netanyahu on the phone. I think he's been a good vice president. He relates to a segment of the population that Obama does the least well with, and that's kind of working class people, men in particular. Biden comes from that background in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I think Biden probably entertains thoughts of running for president himself in 4 years, because they say the only thing that cures the wish to be president is embalming fluid. And, but I don't, he's tried before, and I don't, but he's a good soldier. He's been very loyal to this president. I talked earlier about how Obama's going to have to organize his White House to relate to Capitol Hill differently, and Biden can be helpful there. In the Woodward book, they call Biden the McConnell whisperer, because he gets along better with Mitch McConnell. But anyway, so I think there was a lot of talk all this year about how Biden would be replaced with Hillary. That would have been seen as an act of desperation. Although Biden would love to be Secretary of State too, I'm sure. He has boundless energy. He's just interested in everything. I find him to be an all-around good guy, and when he was in the Senate, he was one of the poorest members of the Senate, which I think speaks well for him too. Okay.
Eleanor, thank you very much
for
joining us.
Thank you.